But we should not be misled by the term that the modern term democracy is taken from the ancient term demokratia. But the ways in which ancient communities implemented this ideal and the institutions by which modern states have tried to put democracy into practice are very different. And the ideological justification for modern democracy is also very different. Ancient democracy could not have been based on a concept of inalienable human rights because the practice of slavery was widely practiced and accepted. The Greeks had no objection to allowing masters to exercise the rights of ownership over other human beings. But perhaps we should not stress the differences too much. The Athenians believed that all major decisions about public affairs should be decided by a majority of those who attended the assembly. And the citizens of modern democracies also have the right to elect public officials. But we should not repeat the mistake and claim that the Athenians had democracy without liberalism. Even though the Greeks did not have a concept of universal human rights, they still had a concept of rights for free persons, and their courts were not arenas for elite competition, but an institution aimed at protecting the substantive rights of individuals, whether they be the rights of liberty, freedom from physical abuse, freedom from slander, the right to property, the right to have one's contracts enforced, and the right to a fair trial according to fixed rules before impartial judges. All the hallmarks of the rule of law. There seems to be a general consensus, however, that populism is an ideology that sets the people who are portrayed as morally good and honest with an elite who are corrupt and pursue their own self-interest at the expense of the rest of the population. It is this binary opposition which is at the foundation of most varieties of populism. To gain power, populists will mobilize their supporters into social movements or political parties. But, and this is important to keep in mind, populism is also a matter of style as well as substance. Now, another reason why it's difficult to find ancient populists in one way is the structure of Greek political institutions, and here I come to my new institutionalism approach. Now, to adopt a more institutional approach to political activity, one needs to place the behaviors of leaders in their institutional context. In the modern world, governments are divided into three branches: executive, legislative, and judicial. The ancient Greeks divided up their political institutions in a very different way, which is reflected in the organization of the chapters 42 and following in the Aristotelian Constitution of the Athenians. There was a deliberative part, which was the council and assembly, the officials, who might be elected, this was considered aristocratic, or selected by lot, which was considered democratic, and the courts, whose judges in Athens were selected by lot on any given day. What this system lacked was a professional bureaucracy under the control of the executive. One does also not find in Athens any Athenian equivalent to the modern hostility towards immigration expressed by certain populist leaders. There were no Athenian politicians demanding that a wall be erected from Aropos to Sunion and from Sunion to Eleusis, or a political party in Athens called Alternativa Hieroatica. Perhaps the leading candidate for the title of populist in democratic Athens would be Cleon. But what changed during the Peloponnesian War was the use of the courts to attack enemies. Pericles was one of the first victims, but there are several others in the following years. The pattern is very clear. No major politician convicted in the courts between 480 and 430, and yet over a dozen, possibly 24 in the following years. And the man who was primarily responsible for this change was Cleon. But one cannot understand Cleon's success and that of those who imitated his tactics without examining the institutional framework of the courts and their weaknesses. As we noted before, modern populists often disrupt the norms of political discourse, especially in their use of language, but also by their personal attacks on opponents. In all the speeches founded in Thucydides and Xenophon, speakers never attack the integrity of other speakers. At Syracuse, after Athenagoras charges Hermocrates with plotting to overthrow the government in an assembly speech, a general intervenes and states, quote, "It is not well for speakers to utter calumnies," the interesting word is diabolos, "against one another, for their hearers to entertain them. We ought rather to look to the intelligence that we have received and how each man by himself and the city as a whole may best prepare to repel the invaders." The general quite perceptibly observes that accusations about personal motive tend to poison the atmosphere and inhibit proper deliberation. Lies have consequences, and especially when it comes to an important topic like climate change. Newspapers now publish fact checks for political speeches, but these appear to have little effect. In both cases, the problem is how to police speech, and especially the speech of a lot of populists. We do not tolerate certain kinds of behavior which threatens the public safety and individual rights, but how to police speech that destroys the conversation that we need to have for proper deliberation. Do we need to have someone for the internet, like the general in the Syracusan assembly in 415? I express these as wishes and thoughts because I frankly have no proposals to make.